Hello, you're watching World Talks, where every word matters, and I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, new tariffs on Chinese electronic vehicles come into effect today, making a key flashpoint in an ongoing trade dispute between the 27-nation bloc and the world's second largest economy. The decision has already caused concern given the fact that not all EU member states agreed to the levy. So, what's next in the dispute and what could it mean for Europe's economy and relations with Beijing? Now, to discuss this further, I'm now joined by my guest, Julia Poliscanova, Senior Director, European Federation for Transport and Environment. Good to have you on the program.
Hi, hello everyone.
Let's begin from a simple point here, Julia. We know that these tariffs are now in effect. That already is something we understand. What is next now? Because the Chinese will surely have now their response. What is Europe's response? So how do you see this play out? What are the next steps for China and what are the next steps for Europe?
So the way the situation is today is that tariffs are now applied. They're now definitive. The actual official document, the legal document, was published yesterday. However, there is still an opening in that for the European and Chinese side to continue the dialogue. And we know that the dialogue is continuing, and it might mean that they still will come to some sort of agreement, for example, on the volumes or the prices of Chinese imported electric vehicles into Europe, and therefore some of the tariffs might still be softened. If not, the tariffs will remain in place for the next 5 years. And it's true that we might see some retaliation from the Chinese side, but I personally do believe that the European market is really important to them, and I think we will continue seeing those vehicles on the market here.
Interesting, you pointed out there one of these solutions that's touted as a solution, as you said, the tariffs could last up to 5 years, but then these price commitments, as you just alluded to, setting a price for this, an agreement with both the EU and China. I mean, who wins in that case? Because that sounds like more regulation. It doesn't sound like it's a great deal for the free market.
So generally, I think we have to realize that it is because of subsidization in China, but it's also just because Chinese players have scaled and started this journey to electric vehicles a lot sooner than many European companies. So today they command scale, they control a lot of supply chains and genuinely can produce electric vehicles at much lower costs and frankly really good quality compared to European counterparts. So even if Europe or the EU would agree a minimum price on those vehicles with the Chinese counterpart, those vehicles are still likely to be quite affordable compared to what we have in the European market today by European companies. Ultimately, the only thing that can really help the European car industry to compete, and not just tariffs, but it's actually accelerating their own transition and bringing on the market as many more affordable models as soon as possible before the market is completely captured by Asian counterparts.
Yeah, and I think this is what had the Commission, worried in the first place of how the scale of market content by these EVs in Europe is growing by these major players out of China. BYD is just one of many. My question now is, if we look back in history a little bit, let's compare. If we look at solar panels, for instance, the solar panel war was lost. That is very much in the hands of the Chinese, almost, to 100%. Now, the goal of Europe here, to try and build up another sector, EVs, the whole gamut of the infrastructure, the supply chains, the resources. It's nice on paper, Julia, but can Europe really do that? Is it not too late, seeing as how the lithium and all the raw materials come from elsewhere? Can we build up this infrastructure? Can Europe rise to compete with China on this?
So Europe can, absolutely, but we need to move incredibly quickly because that window of opportunity is closing very fast. In fact, if you look at the various industry announcements in Europe until recently, we have dozens of battery gigafactories planned, and we do have a number of, for example, lithium projects in Europe, so that we can actually be self-sufficient in battery and, for example, lithium manufacturing. So that the possibility is there. We've just been too slow at scaling this quickly. I don't think we are today with electric vehicles automotive where we were with solar. We never had a solar industry in Europe, so it was always a tall order to compete. However, we do have a strong automotive industry. We are planning affordable electric vehicles, for example, by Renault, by Peugeot, by Citroën, by others. So the possibilities there is just about the speed. Let's move quickly and we can avoid the solar disaster in Europe. If we don't, it indeed will be the same.
Well, I think, Julia, I think speed in terms of European Union decisions is not a hallmark, I think, of a lot of decision strategy and everything that comes out of Brussels. So in your estimation then, what's next? How quickly must this be done? What's the missing ingredient here for Europe to then really scale this up? Is it a labor issue? Is it in terms of more resources? What's missing here in your mind to make this more future-proof?
So first and foremost, we do have a strong regulation that requires car makers to go electric quickly by 2035. This is critical because it creates that long-term vision and investment certainty for everyone in the supply chain, for example, battery manufacturers, to invest into Europe. That needs to be kept. If it goes, all the momentum of this goes away. So that's number one. But on its own, it's not enough. We need a comprehensive automotive green industrial strategy. That should include trade policy, not only higher tariffs on EVs, but also going deeper into the supply chain. For example, also similar tariffs on battery cells. And on top of that, we do need to speed up just the way we do things here. Faster grid upgrades, for example, so we can connect chargers quickly so people can buy those electric vehicles and not complain about charging. More investment so we can build things in Europe faster. All of this today is missing, and I hope the new Commission will put this in place. I want to stress just one last thing, however. For me, the outcome of this will not be a stopping of the Chinese electric vehicle offensive in Europe. Their vehicles are good, and frankly, we can all benefit from learning from those companies. What I believe will happen is that a lot more of them will invest into European countries, including Poland, including Hungary. So we'll see a lot more local manufacturing in the same way as we saw Japanese brands, for example, Nissan or Toyota coming to Europe some decades ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the case, though, with Japan, though, is I think from a very, let's say, no matter how the Japanese operated, different types of practices in terms of business. That's what the Chinese have certainly done in a different way. I mean, it stems very much from the unfair subsidies, right? It stems from very much a completely different system. I'm just also curious on your take, even if we look at these tariffs, on how they came about. I mean, the Commission very much took this decision on the investigation of the tariffs very much on its own, not because of requests by the auto industry. There is a divided vote. This also, I think, is telling. So this is not, unity seems to be missing here. What does that say about how Europe approaches this challenge? I mean, Hungary very much already benefiting from BYD, for instance, Chery building manufacturing plants there. Is this going to divide Europe further as certain countries are going to get, let's say, more attention from China in the future? How do you assess it?
So you're completely right that one thing that we don't have in Europe, compared, for example, to the US, which is one federal state, we don't have one unified vision on China. I think today everyone agrees that we must keep and save our automotive industry. It's critical to Europe, to our social fabric as well as industrial fabric. We want to get battery manufacturing, but at the same time, Europe or the EU so far has been open to Chinese investment or Asian investment more broadly, because we just need to learn and we don't have all the skills. But beyond that, there is no clear strategy. I hope that with the new commission, especially the new trade commissioner, who will hopefully begin his work next year, we will see a much more unified trade policy, or rather trade defense policy, where we really strategically defend the industries we want to here locally, while being open on things where we have to, for example, critical raw materials. So that's the hope. This is what we have in the famous Mario Draghi report. So the Italian ex-president of the central bank, who recently launched that report on competitiveness, he calls that unified industrial and trade vision. So that's what we lack, and that's what I hope we will get. Whether or not, we'll probably have to sit here in a few months' time and take stock of how things are going.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also ask on that note, you mentioned the Draghi report. I think one thing in that report of many things is very much about building these European champions, right? These large mergers that have up until this point not really been allowed. Do you see that as a potential of also, let's say, raising the bar and competing with the likes of BYD and other major companies out of China?
So it's clear that we need to just make clean manufacturing or genuine manufacturing easier and more attractive in Europe. And it includes indeed having those bigger champions. For me, one of the main things that's missing today is the review or reform of our very cumbersome state aid or subsidy rules. We know we want to build battery factories. We know we want more EVs. We know we want green hydrogen, for example, and electrolyzers. So why are we making these companies go through a really, really tedious bureaucratic process of approving support and investments to those companies? It should be simply made ex ante and quickly. And I think that will really help to build those bigger champions that you are referring to. Otherwise, at the moment, it's just so difficult. Some companies say that you need an army of lawyers to apply to European funding. That's not how we should be in the future. The Chinese are so quick. They bring new models in 2 years. They're so innovative. So if we don't speed up our approach, not just to innovation, but also to scaling manufacturing, we will not be able to compete.
And I think also how I'm reading this is there's still, let's say, the open door to try and mend things with China from Europe. I mean, it's a very different story in the United States where they've brought up their tariffs up to 100% under the Biden administration. Do you think that Europe is going more in the way of, let's say, conciliation here, or should it lean more towards what America is doing vis-a-vis China?
So it's clear that the reason why Europe has done it as it's done is to stay consistent and compliant with the World Trade Organization rules, right? So each tariff is actually specific to different manufacturer, and it's based on specific subsidization rates and all the specific, case by case, basically. It's done case by case. So that makes it compatible with WTO rules, and it does make the European approach to this so far still, very much aligned to the global momentum and trying and being consistent and polite, so to speak, about that. Going forward, I don't think we can keep it this way. I do think that we will need to become a lot firmer. And if we want to build things here, we will have to just say so and be a lot more precise. I also do think that we will have to remain open, however, to Asian or even Chinese investment in Europe. They have the scale, they have the expertise. What we do need to make sure is that we have requirements so we don't just become an assembly plant. So the final vehicle is made here or the battery pack is assembled here. That's not good enough. So we need to add further requirements that can be done as part of this tariffs investigation, by the way, as measures against, counterfeit against this tariffs, to require specific value, I believe up to 50% of an electric vehicle that should be made in Europe to avoid tariffs. And that will mean that a lot more value-add manufacturing, so battery components, for example, materials, will also be made here. On top of that, we need requirements on local skills and workforce engagement. So again, they're not just enclaves of foreign workers, but local people also learn. And if we have those rules, we can really benefit and catch up a lot quicker to produce those technologies of the future compared to completely closing our market.
All right, so still many, many things ahead, and the right answer still eludes us, but we'll cover more of this topic, I'm sure. Julia Poliscanova, thank you so much for all of that. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks here on TVP World, but stay tuned. Much more coming up here. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.